Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Sarah Edens, a finance coach, author, and wealth mindset researcher, and I'm here to help you unlock your inner millionaire by developing a wealth mindset and finance skills. And in today's video, it's the first of a two-part mini-series called Secrets of the Wealthy, and this one is about Warren Buffett. So Warren Buffett is a really fascinating person to study because he's a household name. He is legendary for being one of the world's most successful investors. And also, he's the CEO of Berkshire Hathaway, which is the world's largest holding company. And he also just has a really fascinating backstory on how he became the Warren Buffett we know today, because he started out in a very different place. And it's really a fascinating story. So in today's video, we're going to go through his story and how it wasn't exactly a rags to riches story, but it definitely was. There's elements of that. So that's a very interesting transformation for him personally. And then in part two, we'll go through wealth habits that we can learn from Warren Buffett. So stay tuned for that. That'll be out next week. And if you're watching this later, then I'll link to both of the videos in this series in the description as well. So Warren Buffett, this is really what got me started studying Warren Buffett. This is his biography. And it's a really, really well done biography. I would highly recommend that you read it. As you can see, it's quite long. And I read this years ago, and it is just as interesting as I remembered it. I was flipping back through it when I was preparing for the show this week. And it's just such an interesting book. He literally told his biographer, he said, Alice, if you get my version of the story and then someone else has a version of the story that's less flattering, go with the less flattering version. And I feel like that says so much about who Warren Buffett really is as a person, and perhaps the side of him that no one had really maybe gotten a look at before he published this biography. I believe this came out in 2006. But really, really fascinating. He has a very rich and interesting life story. And if you want to learn more specifically about his investing strategies, this is the book I would recommend. This is called The Essays of Warren Buffett. I'll link to both of these in the description as usual. But this is really interesting. This is a collection of his letters to investors over the years, obviously not all of them. But every year he's famous for releasing a letter to his Berkshire Hathaway investors, and really kind of is a very interesting glimpse into his investment strategies. And so if you want to learn more about Warren Buffett's investing strategies specifically, which are obviously what made him so wealthy and what he's so known for, this is the book to check out as well. So those are some recommended reading. You know how much I love to read. And it's really interesting because one of the things that we'll talk about in my next video about wealth habits is Warren really emphasizes the importance of reading and how important that is. And I just thought that was so cool. I mean, you can see my bookcases behind me. They're either books that I've read or I've ordered and plan to read for one topic or another. I love to read fiction. I love to read nonfiction, you name it. I can't get enough of books. And so it's really interesting to see that he talks about that as a kind of keystone wealth habit. So I'll give you a sneak peek into next week's video as well. But he really credits reading with being a big part of his success. And it's really fascinating and I think somewhat sad today in the digital era that we live in, because while there is such a wealth of information and knowledge online and on social media, people today, your average person, spends 2.5 hours on social media each and every day. And if you think about it, I presume that's the amount of time that people used to spend reading or used to spend pursuing a hobby or pursuing something that they enjoyed or building their professional skills. And not to say that you can't do that on social media. Obviously, YouTube probably counts somewhat as social media, and I spend an inordinate amount of time on YouTube myself. But I feel like with YouTube, it's a learning platform. And obviously, there's content creators out there who definitely use Instagram, TikTok, all the other platforms as a learning platform. So if you're on social media learning something, watching someone else pursue a hobby and getting ideas about how to do that yourself, learning a skill, all of those things, it can be great. However, there's also the tendency that all of us have, myself included, from time to time, especially if it's, you know, if I'm just feeling a little bit distracted, and then I get even more distracted if I get on Instagram. But there's that kind of mindless scrolling that can happen when we get on social media as well, where we're not there to learn something, or we're not there to improve ourselves. It's just pretty much, we're just zoned out. And so that's a really key wealth habit that you can take away as a sneak peek to my next video about that, is start reading a little bit more. Warren Buffett actually recommends reading 500 pages a day, which is a lot. That's the length of most books these days, because books in general have gotten a little bit shorter than they used to be. But at least, one book, or maybe like that's half of a longer book. But that is a real challenge, and I feel like I'm going to actually take that challenge. Let me know in the comments if you want to take the read more challenge with me, like read more, social media less. How about read more, scroll less? I think we can call it read more, scroll less. But let me know if you want to do the read more, scroll less challenge with me, and we'll start reading more. It doesn't have to be 500 pages every day, because I know you're busy and I'm busy, but just carving out that time. Because if we're all spending, on average 2.5 hours on social media, that's 2.5 hours we could be reading instead. And we could probably get through, a pretty decent sized book in that amount of time. Or you can listen to Audible too, obviously, if you prefer to learn and read that way by listening to the books narrated. Audible is a wonderful option as well. So that's always good too, because then you can multitask and put a book on in the background as well. And, it's interesting too, because I've been thinking about it as I've been growing my channel, and I just cannot seem to get my videos short. I know a lot of content creators are advised to start with 10, 12-minute videos, and mine are routinely 20, 25, 30, sometimes 35 or more minutes long. But, I thought about it and I was like, I'm just not a soundbite person. Everything I have to present here, I have pages and pages of show notes that are all done up, that they're not, I'm not reading off of a script or anything, but just all these ideas that come to me when I'm creating content, and I want to share those with you. And I want to thank you for being here as well. If you're a subscriber, welcome back. And if you're a new viewer, welcome. I'm really happy to have you here and to be learning together, because this sort of thing with the wealth mindset, finance skills, it's really not something we can learn in sound bites. It's something that we have to kind of take the time and really do a deep dive into these different topics. And so while I do over on my Instagram kind of do more of those sound bites, right now I'm doing a 30 days of making more money series on Instagram. And, so that's and I'll put a little collection of those in my stories so that you can go back and review all of those if you want to. But it's just one of those things where it just takes time to explore these concepts and to learn. And especially if you're new to personal finance, and if you're new to thinking about wealth in this sense of having that wealth mindset, looking at the abundance there is out there, visualizing a life where you have all the financial resources that you need and more, then it can just take some time to learn those skills. So again, thank you for being here. All right, so let's jump into Warren Buffett's story. So Warren Buffett was born in 1930 in Omaha, Nebraska. His father was a congressman, and so he spent part of his childhood in Nebraska and then also some in Washington, D.C. And in his biography, it's just really fascinating because he talks about how basically, and this was the thing that struck me the most and surprised me the most when I started reading his autobiography, which by the way is called The Snowball, which I thought was just such an apt title for someone who made his wealth investing. And that investing is definitely that kind of snowball effect of compound interest, where you keep your money in your investment, it keeps making you more and more money back every year because your interest grows on that with compound interest. So great title for that book. But Warren Buffett, despite having loving parents who he credits for his success in life because he said they never gave up on him, and never, even though he was a very, very, very challenging child to have by his own account, he said his parents never gave up on him. But anyway, he was just, I think he's one of these people that's just absolutely brilliant in many different regards, but did not do well in the conventional educational model, which has been criticized very frequently. The traditional educational model has been criticized so many times for, at least here in the US, for, not teaching independent thought, not teaching critical thinking skills, not teaching problem solving skills. So anyway, long story short, school was not a good fit for Buffett. And so he said he had horrible grades. Every single subject you can think of, he said he got X's and bad marks in everything from, how he behaved in class to how he treated his teachers or his fellow students. And it's just fascinating because it's hard to reconcile that with this kind of wise, wealthy man that we know today. He's 92. He'll be turning 93 next month. And apparently he has no plans to retire anytime soon. Rumor has it from his biographer that he doesn't plan to retire until 103. So he has a good more 10 years to go here. So really inspiring guy. You think about a lot of people are just ready to put their feet up and retire at 65, and Buffett's still working at 92, almost 93, because he's doing what he loves. And he said that he finally found something that he loved to do, but school was not his thing. And so he said literally his teachers at one point, when he was in school, he was just so poorly behaved that they literally put him in his own classroom by himself, and they didn't even want to interact with him. And so they would put his little lessons, because all the schoolwork was obviously on paper back then, they would put his lessons and kind of slide them under the door, and he would do them and then slide them back because they just didn't want to deal with him. And I'm so interested. I imagine all the people who were teaching him have since passed away, but I'm so interested. I wish it'd be interesting to find out what his teachers would have said if they'd seen kind of where he went as he progressed in his career versus how he started, because it was not an auspicious start. And in fact, he was very fortunate not to end up in jail for shoplifting as a youth, because when he was in high school, his family moved to Washington, D.C., where his father was a congressman. And he and his pals would just literally shoplift. He said after school, they would literally go and just shoplift. And they especially liked Sears and the sporting goods department. And they would go and steal golf clubs and golf balls. And he said they had no use for them at all. They didn't play golf. They weren't reselling them or anything. They would just stole it for fun. And so you can imagine today it's a lot harder to get away with shoplifting, but this would have been back in the 1940s. And, no security cameras or anything of this nature. But it was just really interesting to hear that he had so much trouble in school, and then he got in with a bad crowd and was shoplifting and just really not doing well in his personal life or his education as a young man. And in fact, to the point where his teachers and the school administrators did not allow him to graduate with the rest of his high school class, because he refused to wear his graduation cap and gown and was just so disruptive that they graduated him separate from the whole rest of his class. And so it's just a fascinating, fascinating story. He said if his parents had ever given up on him, he doesn't know what would have happened, but he had very patient parents. His dad at one point caught wind of what was going on with the shoplifting in particular. Obviously, they knew about the grades. But with the shoplifting, they got wind of that, and Warren had a paper route at the time that he just loved. He had this little business delivering papers, and his father sat him down and he said, "Warren, if you keep doing this, I'm going to take your newspaper route away," because he knew that Warren loved that newspaper route more than anything else, and so that cured the shoplifting. But yeah, I think it's just a good reminder that a lot of times, you might have a child who's really, or a young person who's not performing well by our standards, our academic standards in school, or has fallen in with a bad crowd. But it doesn't mean they're dumb. I think that a lot of times if you're getting bad grades in school, teachers, parents, whoever tend to write you off as dumb, or at least dumb in a certain subject, versus saying maybe our educational system is failing this child. And that's just kind of a whole nother tangent. But I do think it's really interesting to just remember from Warren's story that very often it's not necessarily everything. It's not the full picture of what that young person is capable of. So anyway, Warren survived high school, and his teachers survived him, and were probably very happy to see him go by the sound of it. And so he went on and applied to Harvard, and Harvard turned him down, which is very interesting. I wonder what Harvard feels about that. And so then he went on and was accepted into Columbia University, where he studied finance and investing with some really brilliant mentors of his who were the leaders in what's called value investing, which is the concept of picking out high, good quality companies that are undervalued. So they might be just underselling or trading for less than their potential. And it's so interesting. This just hit me. But I feel like Warren was basically a value stock, if you think about it. He had so much potential, but thank goodness his parents were able to see that and didn't lose hope, and, that he didn't end up in jail or whatever, because he had a lot of value and a lot of potential as a person, but it certainly wasn't shining through when he was in school. So fascinating point there. But anyway, he got really, really good at learning how to pick these stocks and really thrived at Columbia University. He also started to work on his people skills, which he said never came naturally to him. And I couldn't find this book. I recently reorganized my bookcases, and I just spent like 30 minutes this morning looking, because I know I have this book in my possession, but I don't know where it went. Maybe I loaned it to someone. But it's the book that Warren Buffett credits in his biography with the book that helped him build his people skills. And it's a timeless classic. You will probably have heard of it already. It's called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I'll link to that in the description. But Warren said when he got a hold of that book, that was the book that really helped him start to realize that he needed to change his approach towards people, particularly girls, because you can imagine he could not get any dates whatsoever because he was just, he's a really geeky guy, but like a little bit so much so that he was just having a lot of trouble even getting girls to date him, and obviously wanted to date at that point in his life when he was in college. And so he realized he needed to kind of work on his people skills. So as he got older, he started to really get some more kind of introspection into the areas that he needed to grow in as a person, and started really working on his people skills. And it's interesting too, because he talks in his biography about how terrified he was of public speaking throughout his life. He would routinely be ill before having to speak in public, and then pretty much throughout his whole life, and really hated public speaking. But it's really interesting because you'd never really know that, because he's given so many public addresses. He's in such a prominent position as the CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. He's eminently quotable. If you look up, I'll link to an article in the description with Warren Buffett's top 100 most famous quotes. That's just a really fun read as well. And so anyway, the long story short of this is that he also began to overcome his public speaking fears and get better at that. So he really started to work on himself in college. And then once he graduated from Columbia, he went back to Omaha for a while, and then he got hired on Wall Street by his mentor, who he'd studied in under college, who I cannot remember his name off the top of my head. He's super famous. I'll put it on screen. I forgot to write this down. But anyway, he went back to work on Wall Street and continued to kind of develop his love of value investing and playing the stock market that way. And he eventually was so successful that they started calling him the Oracle of Omaha. You probably have heard him called that. So at age 26, he and his wife, Susan, who had been married in 1952, they moved back to Omaha, Nebraska, and bought their first home in 1958 when they moved back there. And they bought it for $31,500, and they still live there today, or he does. Susan sadly passed away a few years ago, but he and his second wife still live there in the first house that he ever bought. An interesting story. So when he was 26 in 1958, he actually was a millionaire at that point just from doing value investing. And so he really seriously considered retiring at that point, and was ready to just, say, hey, I've made my money. This is great. And I can just live on the dividends from my investments now. And so that is lucky for all of us that he didn't stop there at 26, but he had a couple of times where he kind of threatened to retire intermittently just because he really didn't need the money at all. And now he's probably just going to continue to work till 103 like what he's planning. So they moved back to Omaha, and that's when he, previously to that, he'd bought Berkshire Hathaway, which was a failing textile company, and he turned that around and then eventually was able to have his company, which he called Berkshire Hathaway, which is the world's largest holding company today, which just means that they hold significant portions of different companies' stocks. So they're a controlling investor in various companies. So he was just a really fascinating kind of turnaround there from where he was failing in high school and juvenile delinquent to being a millionaire at age 26 and pondering retirement. And so he's continued to run his business from Omaha and from that same house that he lives in ever since. And he really, again, I mentioned this before, but he really emphasizes how important it is to do something that you love that's sustainable for the long term, so that you can just keep working, so that even if you're not working for the money particularly, you have something to do that's interesting and enjoyable. And that's what he found in investing. So really, really fascinating story there. And he's worth today, as I'm filming this, he's worth $115 billion. He is one of the top 10 richest people in the world. And interestingly enough, he's only one of two of the top 10 richest people in the world who did not build their wealth during the tech boom of the 90s. So interesting story there. Warren Buffett was actually very anti-tech, despite being best friends with Bill and Melinda Gates. He and his wife, Susan, were very, very close to them. But despite that, he was very suspicious of the whole tech thing. He just wasn't into it. And he actually took a lot of heat and a lot of criticism for not getting on board at all with that tech boom and taking advantage of that. You can imagine what his wealth would probably be if he'd invested in Apple and Microsoft and all these other companies during the 90s. Not that 115 billion is anything to sneeze at, but imagine how much more it could be if he'd been in the tech sector at that point. So it really wasn't until much, much later that he started investing in tech. But he had this philosophy, and still does at the time, of never invest in companies that you don't understand how they work. And obviously tech was such a revolutionary thing that nobody understood particularly how it worked when it first came out in the 90s, but everyone adopted it right away because it was so revolutionary. And so he eventually got into tech holdings down the road and now owns companies like Apple and things like that as part of Berkshire Hathaway's holdings. But that was kind of an interesting story of how it was one of those, he's very, very, very good. I would say Warren Buffett is one of the best people in the world at spotting opportunities when it comes to investing in undervalued companies or underpriced companies. Just now from long years of experience, but I would say he's always been an absolute genius at that. But it was an interesting opportunity that he didn't necessarily see. So it's good to see that even the most genius, brilliant people out there definitely have times where they miss things and then correct it later. And so not to worry if, you don't get every opportunity right. He obviously had lots and lots of opportunities that he was able to take advantage of there and build his wealth that way. A couple other interesting little things. He is very, very frugal, and it's something we'll talk about in next week's video as well in the second part of this mini-series. He is extraordinarily frugal. So we already talked about how he doesn't, he's still living in his same home that he bought back in 1958. It's a very nice home. It's a 1920s historic bungalow. So it's a beautiful home. But obviously with $115 billion, you could buy yourself your own island or your own country practically. I don't even know how far that would go. But he's happy there. He drives an old car. He says he doesn't drive much, so why get a nice car? He goes to McDonald's most mornings for breakfast on his way into the office and gets a $4 breakfast. And it's the same $4 breakfast he's been eating for years and years and years. So he's really a creature of habit that way and very frugal habits. He's certainly not someone who's ever succumbed to lifestyle inflation. He's definitely, forget your millionaire next door, he is definitely your billionaire next door. And if you haven't read The Millionaire Next Door, I will link to that in the description because that's a fabulous book. And it encapsulates, I feel like, a lot of Warren Buffett's approach to life. And I'm sure that his frugality played a big part as well in his success and why he's done so well, because he wasn't spending his money on cars and houses and consumer goods and so forth. He was just reinvesting those into, assets that performed incredibly well. And that's definitely a skill that, you can learn. You can hire investment advisors to advise you. Investing is something that's absolutely fascinating. I think for a lot of people, it's very frustrating to try to do themselves because it's just as easy to lose money on the stock market as it is to make it if you don't know what you're doing. In fact, all things considered, I would say it's probably easier to lose money with your investments if you don't know what you're doing and are just randomly picking stuff out or whatever, randomly buying companies you've heard of before or something, having this kind of non-strategic approach. You have to have a pretty strategic approach to investing, and it's not something that's in my wheelhouse to teach on this channel, but you can definitely look because there's so many great resources out there if you're wanting to get into investing. And I would encourage you to really study Warren Buffett's approach to investing too, because I think he very much was not a speculator when it came to investments, where he wasn't just buying the latest, meme stock or something. Not that they had memes back in the 40s and 50s, but, he wasn't buying like the get rich quick stuff. Get rich quick schemes have always been around, let's be honest, always. And so he wasn't buying into those. He was looking at things that were valuable, underpriced, and that he could hold for the long term. And that's his investment approach. So it's an interesting thing to study if you're a new investor and want to kind of invest like Buffett. Definitely study his methods. And his letters to investors are a great resource because you can go and actually learn exactly kind of what's going through his head when he's buying different things. Years the economy was up, years the economy was down, things like that. So really fascinating. And the only things that Warren Buffett has spent money on that are like kind of traditional, what you think of as like things the wealthy and super rich have, he finally broke down and bought a private jet after years of refusing to have a private jet and kind of making fun of other wealthy people who had private jets. And it just became necessary for him because of security reasons. He needed to have his own jet. And so he literally nicknamed it the Indefensible because he felt like he couldn't defend his purchase of a private jet after so many years of making fun of his wealthy friends who had their private jets. So I thought that was hilarious. And then he also had to upgrade his personal security, obviously, especially after an attempted kidnapping attempt in 1987 in New York City when two men tried to kidnap him. Unfortunately, were not successful. But he has a very large security entourage to protect him when he's going around, because you can imagine what a win it would be for kidnappers to be able to have some kind of a situation where they could get a hold of him. So he's got a great security detail as well that he obviously spends on. But from what I could tell from reading his biography and doing some studying and research online last week while I was prepping for the show, he is just really streamlined about what he spends money on, and then is just really, really, he lives and breathes value investing. And it's certainly not something that, most ultra wealthy people, I can't think of any other ultra wealthy people right off the top of my head. I'm sure there are other millionaires and billionaires next door who are super frugal and have built their wealth and then just, continue to build it and don't inflate their lifestyle. And that's not for everyone. A lot of people, as they make more money, do want to be more comfortable than that and don't want to have to eat $4 breakfasts at McDonald's. But it's like, hey, whatever floats your boat. So I thought that was fascinating, though, that, a little takeaway there of, the whole billionaire next door thing that he has going on in Omaha. And then finally, to kind of wrap this up, the other thing that I think is really inspiring about him is he is a very generous philanthropist. So he not only has multiple foundations that he and his family have founded that they give generously to, but then in 2006, he announced that he was making a massive donation with really the bulk of his wealth going to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation with their charity. And so that was really, when that announcement came out in 2006, people were just stunned because, again, not typically the behavior that you see in the ultra rich to make all of this money and then just give it all away. But I think that speaks a lot about who Warren Buffett is, that he was never doing this for the money. He never went into finance thinking, oh, I'll get into finance because that's a good career field and I'll get rich and then I can have a nice lifestyle. He just did it because he was good at it, enjoyed it, and loved playing the game of investing, and specifically values investing. And so I think that that's really telling too, that he then is not attached to his money and isn't holding his money super tightly While he doesn't necessarily spend a lot of it on himself, he's being very generous with it with other people. And that's something we can take away so much from, no matter if you have lots and lots of money or not, is just, somewhat, yes, the frugality, but then also don't hold too tightly to your money. Be willing to share that with an open hand with others around you. Obviously not being generous at the expense of your own financial needs and your own savings and investing goals, obviously. But just within reason for where you are in your life, to have that kind of open hand with your money. And I think that the thing that really lets Buffett do that is he's not worried about where the next paycheck's going to come from. He's not worried how he's going to pay the bills. He doesn't have to worry about money. And so I think when you have enough wealth accumulated that money's not a concern, it's probably easier to hold it with an open hand. I can tell you from personal experience, when I've been going through times in my life where I didn't have a lot of money, you definitely cling to it more because you're not sure when more is going to come into your life, versus if you're feeling more relaxed and calm about your financial picture. And it's like, hey, whatever. No worries, I can afford to be generous in this situation. I can give gifts to my family and friends. I can donate to charities. I can donate to animal shelters. I can do these things for these different people in my community and for causes that I care about. And I won't miss that money because I've got enough to meet my needs. So that's really what we're here on this channel doing, is learning together from people like Warren Buffett. And again, this is the biography. It's super great. Really fine print. Well, not super fine print. Fairly small print. Lots and lots of pages. This will take you, if you go read your 500 pages a day, let's see, how many pages is this if you don't count the footnotes. Okay, this is 707 pages. So if you do Warren Buffett's approach of read 500 pages a day, you'll get to through this in about a day and a half. So, but it's a fun read. And just that we can all learn from him and learn how to have fun while we're making money and find something that we love to do, because what you love to do is going to be different from what I love to do. And the way that you make money is different from the way that I'm making money. And so it's really just finding that thing that clicks for you. And maybe you've tried a lot of different things in your life and maybe they haven't made a lot of money. Don't give up. Keep looking, keep trying new things, take a new class, buy a book on a topic that you're interested in. Just keep looking, because that thing that you love to do that will pay you well is out there. Are we all going to become gazillionaires? No, but for most of us, I can tell you, I don't need $115 billion to be happy. And clearly Warren Buffett doesn't either, because he's happy with his $4 McDonald's breakfast trips. So it's just one of those things where keep looking for that thing that you love to do, but also one that pays you well and that pays you and pays the bills and just takes that financial pressure off of yourself and your family. And then plan to do that for a very long time. I think that the future of retirement is a little bit, in question, depending on, where you live and, the way that the government social programs and all this government debt that the governments around the world are in. Retirement programs for people, my age and younger, it might not be the same retirement situation as was there for our parents or our grandparents' generations. And so having a job that you love to do, that's bringing in good money, that you can do for the foreseeable future and wouldn't mind working until you're, in your 90s like Buffett doing, that brings you joy, that's the kind of career field that will sustain you in the long haul. So keep looking for that if you haven't found it yet. It's out there. All right, well, that wraps it up for today's video. Thank you so much for being here on my channel and for watching. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Thank you again to all my subscribers for being part of the community and helping us grow here on YouTube. And I will see you again soon in part 2 of this mini series on Warren Buffett.